All right. Good. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Shelburne Planning Commission on September 13th. First item is approval of the agenda. And, well, all right. Make a motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Dick, seconded by Andrew. For discussion, I just wanted to comment. I think last time we had to defer approval of the minutes from 8-9 because we didn't have a quorum of people from that meeting. We do have, the four of us were all part of that meeting, so we could approve those minutes. What I'm going to suggest is that we just do that at the end. We can just talk through that. So if that's okay with everybody, all in favor of approval of the agenda with that? Aye. All right. Next item is the approval of the minutes from August 23rd, which I think, yep, four of us were.
I was not there.
You were not. Okay. So we can't approve those anyway, right?
It's one of those things.
Or is that a
we were
gray
talking
area?
About as recently as this morning in another group. There's no statutory requirement that minutes be approved. There's nothing that talks about people being present, but yes, by all rights, you can say, let's defer this. But if you were to go a long period of time, someone who was not in attendance could conceivably vote. Just saying.
Right.
Just saying.
Right. No, that's true. Does anybody have any objections to deferring this? I didn't have any major comments from last time. Figure we could.
I think it looked appropriate to me when I looked at especially the PUD discussion was quite a bit, and then public hearings. So.
If you're deferring the August 9 until the end, and you are
Yeah,
going to have
well,
more people later, you might want to
All right.
put it all back.
All right.
The
Let's
one
just.
question I had was, there was the one unnamed woman who suggested narrowing the roadway with a barrier between the roadway and a bike walk lane on the other side, but it was not clear what road she was talking about, but
Right.
it
Well-
came on the heels of talking about falls, which would make sense, but anyway, that was the only thing I thought.
Yeah, I didn't look at the tape.
I would say if there aren't any any objections to just holding the approval to the end, and then we can decide then if we have time or
If Kate appears, she can.
she might be able to
Forum on
clarify
these
that.
ones, right?
That's true. All right. So we'll hold on that. Any disclosures relating to any potential conflicts of interest tonight? Seeing none. All right. Any comments from the public on non-agenda items? Yes, sir.
I wanted to talk about,
Mind
If you could
just
use the mic
grabbing
out.
one of the mics? Yeah.
I wanted to talk about sidewalks a little bit.
And for the purpose of the notes, could I grab your name as well?
Alan
Okay.
Kirkpatrick.
All right.
Thanks, Dean.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a house up on Spear Street, Irish Hill, and I have a picture of where it is so that you guys can get a better idea.
All right.
I have 6 acres there, and I've lived there about 25 years. And I'm trying to divide a 2-acre lot off of my 6-acre lot so that I can build a smaller house and stay there. And in this subdivision process, I'm in the midst of my final DRB meeting. And the big hangup is that I need to put a sidewalk in across 600 feet of my property. And there's ledge, and it's all treed also. So there's an engineer that I'm working with who has roughly estimated it at $75,000 to do that. And we have the widened shoulder on the road, which seems to me like it would be adequate for people walking or riding bikes. But there is some pressure to not accept that and to put a sidewalk there. So I wanted to talk to the board here a little bit about this and see what this is all about.
Yeah. Well, Actually, we do have on the agenda for later on under other business, there is a memo that we got from Ravi that I believe touches on this exact thing. So that would be our grounding in the conversation and where things go. So
Okay. Well, you know, some of my observations, the requirement is for a sidewalk on one side of the street. There's no plan. So does it go on my side of the street? Does it go on the other side of the street? Nobody can tell me that.
I can tell you, Alan.
Okay,
It goes on your side of the street
how do you know that?
because you own property only on one side of the street, so you have
Yes.
no opportunity to put it on the other side. But just to interject, there's really no question regarding the meaning of those words in my mind. And if you own only on one side of the street, or if you're doing a subdivision that doesn't involve the creation of a street, in which case then you'd have the question which side. There's no doubt as to which side it can go on when you own only one side of the road.
Okay, so,
Furthermore, if I can just interject, the regulations have as a default facility a sidewalk, but as Kate, who just walked in, knows, it's not the only type of facility that the DRB can require. The regulations say that the DRB has the discretion to require an alternative facility such as a path.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not an absolute requirement for a sidewalk. The bylaw says that the DRB can require an alternative facility such as a path. The issue, as I understand it, and not to get ahead of ourselves as far as this memo, is the question, is a wide shoulder within the intention and meaning of the bylaw when the example used in the bylaw is such as a path?
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who have opined that a shoulder is an adequate substitute for a sidewalk, and there are those who are of the opinion that it isn't.
yeah, and I thought the memo was good. I think that discussion is going to happen. I can tell you that there won't be any decisions made this evening. It's going to be a discussion. So
Sure.
and I wouldn't ask you to sit through the entire meeting to wait until the end to do that. Certainly welcome you to watch it online though. And we can see where that goes. I think there are definitely some valid points raised. I think there is some clarity that needs to be added. So that's,
well, I just have some observations that I wanted to put out there.
Sure.
You know, and one is, you know, this, which side of the street it goes on. So basically, there doesn't appear to be a plan for my section of the road. You know, it seems like that would have to be engineered.
well, I would say that
So,
in part of this, and there may be some other observations, but this is getting ahead of ourselves because this is part of the discussion that is around
Yeah.
that memo
Okay.
in general. To that point specifically, though, just to give you my take, is that the wherever that discussion goes, if nothing else, there may not be sidewalks or paths on that side of the road right now or on either side of the road. But the idea
Right.
over time is that as changes happen, there needs to at least be some kind of mechanism to be able to do that. So I think the spirit of that is that if somebody is going to be doing any subdividing, then we need to have some kind of either provision for adding in that sidewalk or path, or have an easement in order to do that in the future, or perhaps it's some other mechanism that at least provides the space to contain that. And completely understand that if you're the first property that happens to do that, then it's an awkward thing.
most of the property between Bishop and Irish Hill is developed already. So this is kind of an unusual thing that I'm doing. So it appears that there will be 600 feet of sidewalk to nowhere there.
And that's where I would ask
if I were to do
ho- and I understand from your perspective that there's timelines and funds and that sort of thing that are,
Right.
this is an active process, but the fact that this is on the agenda to discuss to see what we can do about it, I think that there is
Good.
some valid discussion that needs
That's
to
good.
take place.
I also wanted to ask if you had gotten any input from the highway department about this at all.
As far as having sidewalks in town?
Yes, you know, and the locations of them, requiring people to put in, you know, segments like this.
The state highway department?
No, Paul Goodrich specifically.
Oh, town.
Yeah, our town. So they have to maintain them, and they're going to be involved in building them also. And
And I
Paul is pretty adamant that he doesn't really want to maintain a sidewalk up on Spear Street, that he doesn't have the money. He's required to maintain it for liability purposes, right? So anyway, it just appears that there's a complete lack of communication there with people that are directly involved with sidewalks.
I understand, and some of my other thoughts I'm going to hold until we actually have the conversation around the memo, because I think that there is some good discussion to come out of that.
Okay.
But definitely appreciate the comments and would welcome you to.
And then the last thing, I just wanted to suggest that I think it might be more appropriate to have people pay a fee, because there are a lot of places in the village that don't have sidewalks. And it seems like you're more likely to want the sidewalk there first. And so, for me to put in a $75,000 sidewalk that sits there for the next 50 years probably,
Understood, and I
kind
imagine
of
that
wasted money.
Yep.
So if I could, put a little money towards a fund, and, you're going to run into a lot of different situations here, I'm sure. There are going to be developers that are going to put in a big development, right?
Mhm.
So maybe, in my mind, that's appropriate for a sidewalk. What I'm doing, where I want to build one small house, I don't feel that it is appropriate. So,
Okay.
a percentage fee or something like that might be a good way to handle that.
And those are things that have come up as topics in the past, and this is how the process works, is that situations come up and we have to reevaluate and see what makes sense and what doesn't.
Okay, great. All right.
Yeah, appreciate the comments. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, and I'll be looking forward to hearing your discussion about it.
Absolutely. Great. Anybody else? Any topics not related to agenda items tonight? All right. Then next item is our zoning discussion around PUDs. How best do you want to do this? You want to pop it up and we'll
I
just
can,
kind
for
of
sure.
go through it? Sure. I wanted to ask, I was kind of holding. Yeah, maybe, well, and we can certainly go through this, but maybe before we get started, based on any review that has been done, are there any preliminary comments or thoughts before we jump into it? No? All right. Then,
Yeah, there's just one little part where I wanted clarification. So it's page 4 of this memo. Under standards there, like, I got lost in that section A, standards in red, for the setbacks. So the village center district setback is 30 feet?
Yep.
Mixed use district,
Has this weird thing that's been in place for a while.
okay,
Where it basically says that there isn't a periphery buffer. It's whatever the setbacks are in the mixed-use district. And the mixed-use district has weird setback requirements because they vary depending on the size of the lot.
okay,
But the essence is that in the village center, it's 30. In the mixed-use district, it's whatever the setbacks are in the mixed-use district. And then in all other districts, it would be 50.
got it,
which
okay.
would be a reduction from 75 in the rural.
And it's a reduction from 75 in the rural.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, just between all the strikeouts, I couldn't make sense of that when I was
I-
reading it, so.
I apologize because I thought
No, it
that
just
in
makes
one
sense.
version I had, somewhere
I
I
was
had
looking
done
for
a
a
red
number, I
line
think.
accepted, I thought.
No, it makes sense now that you explain it, but I think I was looking for a mixed-use district and then some number somewhere, and I just was like, all right, wait, which is which?
Yep.
So thank you.
So perhaps the third time being the charm then, this is the third iteration of this discussion, which, yeah, do we want to just talk through the highlights before we make the motion and,
Well, I think there may be folks here tonight
oh, is this,
who have comments.
sure.
What?
Possibly.
possibly.
Oh, all right.
Since I was
Shouldn't
at a
be able to s-
meeting last night, and yeah, so that, it may not be substantial, but before you wrap up, the high-level overview is that this proposal has evolved, and no longer includes an amendment to the definition of developable land area, and instead addresses the desire expressed by the Miniers. It addresses that by a change to section 330.1, which is the density section, and it essentially creates a carve-out. And it says when you're the owner of a property between 14.9 acres and 10 acres, that your development potential is based on acreage. So it's one dwelling per 5 acres of land. Once you get beyond that carve-out, it's one single-family dwelling per 5 acres of developable land, as it's been for the last umpteen years. So that would be language that, if you warn it for public hearing, could eventually address the Mini's concern. 340 makes PUDs the default in the rural district. 330.3 would modify the open space requirement and set it at 60% in the rural district.
And what had that been before again?
It had been 33% most recently. Historically, it had been 33% for lots of a certain size and 50%. So it has been as high as 50% historically for larger parcels. The next box, paragraph C, would change the language so that so there's a should change to a shall, where lot layouts should be designed to minimize potential conflicts. It would be shall. And where building envelopes may be required, that would become a default. And it's customary for a PUD to have a building envelope. It's a feature of PUDs. And then, because of just the way that the document has been laid out, there would be a repeat of the 60% open space requirement in that paragraph C. And then, at the very end, in 1930.3, we had the topic that we just discussed, what the default, or what the periphery setbacks are. And the very next to the last thing is the lot size. If all development in the rural district is a PUD, then there is no minimum lot size. The minimum lot size comes about as a result of the PUD process. So that's what happens in 330.2. And then the other change, but we've already said that. I'm sorry, I've gotten ahead of myself. The change in the periphery buffer from 75 to 50, one of the reasons for that was by increasing the open space requirement. It could be, some of the benefits of doing that could be undermined by the large periphery buffer. So by reducing the periphery buffer, you've made it possible for people to do a better job clustering. But those are the changes as they reflect the discussion at the last meeting. And as I said in my cover memo, there's a draft motion, there's a draft bylaw change report. So if you were to work to that point, you could use those to warn a public hearing. But like I said, I do believe that there are possibility of some comments.
So let's start with the possible comments.
Yeah, so we
Uh,
met
do
last
the-
night. And
Do you mind grabbing the mic?
Natural Resources Committee met last night, and we're really in agreement with most of what you've done here, and we're just hoping that it might be possible without getting into a lot of delay in Part C, number 2, just being a little less specific and saying that building envelopes should be located in wooded areas or on field edges. And the idea of being a little less specific with that is mostly because in the natural resources section, we're saying be careful about those forested areas. So if we could just be a little less specific without getting into a lot of big changes there, I think that could be more consistent with what's going on in the rest of the plan as designed.
And is it fair to say that one of the suggested edits would be something like building envelopes should avoid open fields and core forests? The concept of core forests
Yeah.
is I think the issue for the Natural Resources Committee, and should not include sensitive areas such as wetlands, floodplains, or steep slopes. That may be one.
I'm okay with core forests because, you know, part of our goal is to preserve scenic resources too. So we don't want to look at the
Correct.
sprawl. So the core forest seems to get to that issue of that's the key habitat and, you know, that we want to conserve.
Yeah, and I think it just makes it a little more consistent with what's coming in the natural resources section.
Is core forest something that's defined in like the open space plan, or would that be something that could be, you know,
We
Is that-
might be able to edit a definition.
feature. It is a feature of the open space plan, and if you go online, if you visit the Natural Resource Atlas, core forests are one of the features that are
Okay,
mapped.
so
There is a
it's-
technical definition of what
Okay.
constitutes core forest.
and is
on
that,
the
is that strong enough to be, in the development process, be something that the DRB would be able to require somebody to, that designation, the fact that it's an open space plan, and does it need to be in our definitions is what I'm wondering about, to make it stick?
Well, there's not a definition in this section of wetland. There's not a definition of floodplain. There's not, there are certain things that the standard understanding is how it's applied.
Okay.
But, I don't want to discourage you from defining core forests, but I think the group was thinking short and sweet. And this process, you should just be reminded that the PUD process begins with an informal meeting that focuses on the developer presenting maps that show natural resources, and they'll use data sources like the Natural Resource Atlas and show layers such as core forests.
Okay.
What if we ask that it be located on the periphery of wooded areas or field edges, kind of directing it towards, I don't know if that
Well, because then you could have
make it any stronger.
you could have a plot of land that's full of trees and where's the edge?
Yeah, I think our concern was simply to not be directing people to place it into the core forest. And so leaving it up to the discretion of the DRB within those definitions, after looking at the maps and reflecting on the comments of a committee like ours, you could leave it more general.
I think what I heard last night was there's concern about the possibility of this language being interpreted in a way that resulted in a proposal in putting house sites in core forests. I don't see that would necessarily be the case, because it says should be located in wooded areas or on field edges. And of course, if someone was to say yes, but that wooded area has it's a core forest. There's a lot more forest that's not core forest than there is core forest, is what I'm trying to get at. What I think the group was saying is emphasize on the places to avoid. And the places to avoid are the open fields, the core forests, and the sensitive areas. And what's left over is the potential site. And I appreciate what Dick is trying to say, but you'll get there just the same if you've avoided these special areas.
That sounds great. That explains my concern.
And it does start with building envelopes and no cut zones shall be required. So I feel like during that process, and maybe Ravi could correct me if I'm wrong, but during that process, that's something that could be evaluated. And if there's not core forest, but if most of the lot is forest, it's and somebody says, I want to put it right in the middle of that, that could be part of the discussion, right?
Right, yeah, just
Yeah.
sort of gives license for that.
Right.
Although, it may be that it's a small enough parcel, it's all wooded, and none of
May
it
not
may be
matter.
core forest. If there are roads on two sides of the parcel, there's a very good chance that it won't qualify as core forest. Core forests have to be a minimum of, I forget, and maybe Robbie, do you remember what the minimum distance is? But they have to be a minimum distance from a roadway, and that cuts out from consideration as core forest a large amount of land.
Right.
Does this, though, interrupt what we're trying to do with locking in wildlife corridors, if we're allowing them to put a house in the middle of what might be a juncture of
Well, and
without listing it here?
I did have a note in that same section on 4C. Curious if there should be something in there to mention wildlife corridors, but almost the circular thought was that we don't. I guess we do have a wildlife corridor map that's broad brush, but those arrows on that map cover wide areas, so it would definitely be something that I feel like there's enough to, if there is concern, to be able to discuss it, but I definitely am trying to not overcomplicate things. I would like
No,
to
and
see
we would
things
like
be as simple as
not do
possible.
that either.
Right. And if we start getting into too many caveats, then it just buries whatever committee needs to actually work through, or whatever group is trying to make decisions.
So what did we do with 2?
I think the suggestion was to take should be located in wooded areas or on field edges and replace it with core forests,
Okay.
so that we're avoiding open fields, core forests, and should not include sensitive areas. Is that,
Works for me.
yeah,
Okay.
all right.
Thank you.
This is for the purpose of warning a public hearing, and of course, at a public hearing, you can always modify it before anything else happens.
That's fair too. Well, then, now I'm the one adding to it. Under D, I just wanted maybe just a clarification. When we say that the open space land should be protected through appropriate legal mechanisms, does that really start muddying the waters as well? I mean, are we saying that if 60% of a plot in the rural district needs to be open space, and we're saying in D that it should be protected through an appropriate legal mechanism, does that mean that anybody that subdivides in the rural area, that 60% they need to work through either the town or Vermont Land Trust or something like that in order to have it officially listed as open space?
Short answer is no. There's a wide range of possibilities in that list. And first of all, this isn't proposed to have any changes made to it. On one end is town owns the land. If the developer wants to make it a dedication, the town could own it, and so then it would be up to the town to determine what happens. Dedication of development rights would mean typically that the developer is going to say to a group like the Vermont Land Trust or the Nature Conservancy or the Lake Champlain Land Trust that they would hold the development rights, and they would typically, that organization would have a management responsibility as part of their mission. Then conservation easements, I guess I would say, is in the same vein. When the town approves a subdivision that has open space, kind of the limited minimal level of involvement is what we call an open space agreement. So it is a document that comes about as a result of the review. Think of it as a contract that makes the town have some power in the event the open space was to become a dumping ground. So it's a document that would say things like, there can't be dumping. You can't use it for inappropriate uses and things like that. It doesn't say that the public has the right to enter upon it. It doesn't make it public. It doesn't give any outside organization rights to it, but it kind of adds an additional level of protection beyond the subdivision and PUD approval, which calls it open space.
Isn't Ridgefield development is? Isn't that, that kind of open space?
Well, that is the open space for a planned unit development. The specific type of mechanism that happened so long before I'm here, I don't know.
Okay. I was just going to say, too, that I think that what Jean was just describing is kind of defined fairly well in the open space plan.
That answers my question. I was mostly just wondering, putting myself in the shoes of somebody that's sitting in one of these sessions and saying, okay, 60% of the land needs to be open space. What does that mean? Does that open up another can of worms? And it seems like we've got the mechanisms for that. So, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So with that parcel that Alan just came and talked about must not be in the rural district?
Well, it's not a PUD
Okay,
and doesn't have an open space requirement.
okay.
I was curious, was that part of the other development,
Mech Farm?
McFarms?
It was a later, it was part of the land developed by the Hubbards, but it wasn't strictly speaking part of Mech Farm. There was the original proposal for Mech Farm, and then there was a much more involved second phase, I'll call it, of maybe 10 or a dozen, maybe you remember, Robbie. And then that project actually got an approval from the town, but I think it bogged down at the state level. And so then they came back for a much simpler proposal of, I think, 4 lots. And his lot is one of those. So it's not Mech Farm, but it's kind of a sister subdivision.
I thought when that was done that those lots weren't to be developed further.
Further subdivision. As far as we are aware, there's no condition of approval that says it can't be further subdivided.
I for some reason, I thought it was tied in with Mech Farm as far as
They
with
get-
the open space and the number of total housing units.
It is a separate project. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can touch on that more when we get to the.
But I guess I'm still confused. So that side of the road is generally the rural area?
No, it's funny because
So that little stretch Mech Farm is
Mech
part of
Farm-
growth area 2.
the
So it's the wrong side of Spear Street, but
so the growth
somehow that
center-
part's in?
So the growth area jumps across Spear Street and takes in the lots that we're talking about. It
Okay.
takes in Mech Farm, and it runs along Bishop, and it takes in Beaver Creek.
Right.
So it is in the growth area. It's not in the rural district.
Okay. Well, that's why I was just curious, just because
Yeah.
it seems strange if he's taking 6 acres and subdividing it. My guess would be that's rural because it's on the wrong side of Spear Street, but.
Right.
That
It is
was-
in the residential district.
That was what brought about the sewer district expansion arguments and discussions 20 years ago.
Well, I mean, these guys are even further afield.
Dean, would it be possible to just call up the zoning real quick? Because
Before we do any of that, can we close out this section? Because we're so close. All we have to do is make the motion and then we can move on. Right? Unless this is related to this
I make a
discussion.
motion to, what am I making a motion to? Warrant a
Well,
public hearing?
there is
or-
There's
draft
a
motions.
motion.
There is, where is that?
Yeah.
I couldn't see that on my
There's 2 of them.
Yeah, page 5 of the memo.
page 5, okay. Ah, here it is, okay. All right, I move to direct staff to warn a public hearing to be held on October 25th, 2018 regarding amendment of the zoning bylaw. The amendment, if enacted, would modify development potential for existing properties less than 15 acres in size, where subdivision potential would be based on gross area rather than on developable land area. Subject all residential subdivisions in the rural district to review as PUDs with minimum lot sizes determined thereby. Clarify minimum lot size requirements specified in section 330 by incorporating reference to PUD requirements, and standardize open space requirements in residential PUDs at 60%, and finally, decrease the periphery buffer requirement applied to residential PUDs in the rural district from 75 feet to 50 feet, as reflected in documents previously distributed and discussed and approved for hearing.
With the modification that the words
Yeah, that the words,
"and core forests" replace should be located in wooded areas or on field areas.
And core forests replace should be located in wooded areas
Or on field.
or on field edges.
So that's the motion. Is there a
I second.
second? All right. Motion by Kate, seconded by Andrew. All in favor?
No, discussion, please.
Discussion?
So the reference to developable area, I didn't realize that was being deleted. I thought we were just deleting the reference to slope.
Well,
So,
there's, nothing changes in the definition of developable area.
other than the slope.
Well, there's no modification to the definition of developable land area. There's no need for it.
So
a
if somebody
cutout.
came in and
It's
had
a carve out between 10 and
had s-
14.9 that it's gross rather than developable.
Well,
Everything else would be
that's my
developable.
question is, if someone came in with a large 14-acre parcel with 8 acres of swamp, is that still considered gross development land?
You'd be saying that it is, you count the total area, is what you're saying.
I didn't realize that we were giving up the rest of the developable portion. I thought we were just deleting the slopes to make it.
That was one of the approaches that we tried the first time, and that didn't work for whatever the reasons were.
Yeah, I think this is an error.
Think what?
I think it's an error in judgment.
So this, okay.
So you have 5 people, 4 will pass a motion, and it's
Right, and then
the
we
purpose
can
of having a
discuss it
hearing.
at the next, yeah, I'd like to, if we do have the support, I'd like to push it through, and then we can discuss it during the public hearing. So-
Yeah, I'll move it forward. I'll vote to move it forward.
Or, I mean.
But I still
even-
think it's not good.
So,
But I'm more than happy to have the discussion later.
with,
I thought you were the one who didn't like the other approach we took, and so we decided to add all the PUD stuff and sort of wrap it together. I'm confused.
No.
Because what we're saying here is we want to protect the resource. We don't really care where you put it. We want to give you a lot more flexibility about where you can put it in the developable parts of the land.
What would be the concern if you had 14 acres, 8 of which were swamp? You could subdivide, but
Well, that, I didn't understand that
Then
we
we'd be
were
able to
deleting
control where on
developable
those
land. I thought we were developing slope. That was my whole argument, was developing slope without having conditions in place. And that was why I wanted to do the PUD. And I think the PUD is a great idea, but I don't think allowing land that's really non-developable should be included in the mix.
well, how about this?
let me just,
Yeah.
let me just walk that through. So you got your 14 acres, 8 of which are swamps. You've got 6 left. You can subdivide. You've only got 2 3-acre pieces effectively that you could build on, which you can then control where the building on those 2 pieces go pretty discreetly. What don't you like about that outcome?
Because you can't build on a wetland or protected area anyway.
Right.
So
'Cause in effect,
I'm asking in all honesty because I don't see where you're going, like why this is bad.
I think it's not a good idea to use non-developable land. Well, I said, let's move it forward. Let me think about it. It's a kind of a surprise to me that it was this way. I misread it, or I missed it when I was reading it.
Well,
I mean,
since-
I'm happy with 99% of the document, so let's move it forward and see if anybody else comes up with that.
Or even, what I was going to suggest is that we vote, if it moves forward, it gets into the process, there's a hearing, it can be discussed. In the meantime, we can always have a more detailed discussion around this, and then it can come up during the public discussion.
Maybe once I wrap my head around it, it'll be, you know.
I mean,
Yeah.
these guys are not easy to please, and, it got by them.
And I'm glad.
So,
So quick, before they ask more questions. All right.
Okay,
All
so,
in favor of the motion as read by Kate?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
And none opposed. So just for Mary Ann's benefit, it was unanimous.
It was.
Okay,
And then there's a second motion.
yes.
I move to approve the zoning change report prepared by staff and dated September 6, 2018, and direct staff to distribute said report and copies of the amendment proposal as required by statute.
Second.
I assume that means statute, not statute.
Yes. Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right,
Which statute?
right. And then the rest of that section was the actual bylaw report,
Right.
which I didn't have any comment on.
Oh.
So if there are no comments on the report itself, we can move on to the comprehensive plan. If you're okay waiting until the memo discussion,
Sure.
unless we want to, okay. Because I think this is going to take care of that. Okay, so comprehensive plan topics. I am sure, Dean, that you have intro thoughts. My initial thought when going through this, there's a lot of history here, a lot of this from the historical meetings where, I mean, we've basically approved and added those. So it would be the more recent comments, I think, that aren't in there. What I was thinking is if, and of course your comments as well, but if anybody had anything in particular that stood out in a lot of the historical things, maybe we just get those on our radar. Otherwise, it was a great review. But I think that I'm pretty sure everything in there is either being handled by current discussions or has already been added to the plan.
Up to where do you think that's accurate?
I didn't see anything on page 1 or 2. Actually, on page 2, there was one, under number 6, Gail's comment, which is about 7 rows down. There was a suggestion to define a distance so that I wasn't sure the context of that necessarily, but I was just curious if that was something that we had done since you were here. The comment just says that you suggested defining a distance so people are not randomly saying there's a negative impact. This had to do with paths are okay as long as there isn't a negative impact, I believe is the context. That's what it says. Well, my overall context for this discussion is that we had the Bay Road group in here. We went through all of their comments, and I feel like we addressed them. They might not have agreed with everything, but I think we addressed all of those, and I don't know that that was something specifically that came up. So I'm okay to move on. That was the one thing that I had a.
Wasn't that Susan's comment?
Yeah, these were
Could have been
cut and
that too.
pasted from the minutes.
Yeah, and this
right,
is
as
from
far as
July 2017, so I'm not looking to get hung up on any of this. Because we have discussed it since. And I didn't want to step on your toes, Dean, because I know that you had some of these highlighted. Was there?
well, it was trying to separate out the things that were said by people who were attending. The idea
Versus-
was people other than commissioners making comments, and so
Got it.
that's all that it is. There's nothing terribly significant about the highlights other than to differentiate it from you all as commissioners.
So
One of the issues that I thought we had to kind of like think about was prioritization of different, kind of we had, people brought that up and there are some very interesting ideas, but what is the process that we want to engage in terms of like prioritization of these different?
right, and that's in here.
Initiatives
But
and-
if we're working through this section, there were several pages of historical notes. My main thing is just to see if anybody had comments there, so we could just put that behind us and say, all right, now let's
I
focus on.
absolutely agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I
yeah.
think where we are today very, thoughtfully incorporates many of these comments, not all of them.
Absolutely,
But
right.
I think that the people who attended the meetings seem to endorse that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just saying that because I think we did it, but I think that that was upheld by the reception of the people who came. So,
And some new ideas were very interesting.
yeah,
but
yeah.
I think that the concern about the transportation in the last meeting was a little bit interesting discussion, like where people were concerned about that we need to beef up the transportation plan a little bit, where the pedestrian and biking rights are protected and kind of like enable that, especially in the village, and put up speed limits on the road. So that's probably tied in with some of the complete street or other kinds of ideas where it's like friendly for people, or not just drivers.
It is, and let's get to that. I was mostly under the assumption that because this was in the packet and we'd reviewed it, that if anybody had any comments or things that stood out and said, hey, wait, we didn't actually address that, that's what I'm looking for now. And if we can just pass through these pages and say, hey, there's no comments, then let's get into the more recent.
I wonder if we
Stuff.
couldn't pass these comments along when we move this to the select board.
I would not want to do that.
No?
No, well, because this gets into a history. So if you want to talk about something that was discussed in spring of 2017, but has been discussed 4 times since and resolved very recently, then is that helpful for the select board to see? Certainly, it could be available to them if they're interested in seeing the history, but at this point, I'm mostly concerned with the select board reviewing what it is that we're proposing as a draft and commenting on that versus...
I'm just thinking that maybe show them how we got where we are.
Yeah, well, I mean, this could certainly be made available to them, and it is all public if they wanted to look at a history of a particular topic. Okay, so then if these were all covered, then we can, let's see. Yeah, I suppose just fast forward to, yeah, some things were in process. Secondary ag. The 32218 page, that's, if you're flipping through, there's a comment around the comprehensive plan, and you were noting from the Stormwater Water Committee that the committee was looking for a map of impervious surfaces in the town, and I was just curious if we actually had a recommended action for that as part of.
I don't think we do, and at this point in time, the way the Stormwater Committee is going, that may not be necessary for this coming year.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
there's a new impervious layer that I think has just come out. I'm not sure if Tom and his folks are using it, but there is a new
Right,
impervious
the way
GIS
they're
layer.
planning on doing it right now, there's some discussion still. At one point, they had 3 levels of, there was a minimal of 4,000 feet of impervious surface, and you would be billed by how many of these allotments you had. Like you could have, if you had 8,000, you'd be billed twice whatever the rate was, and the rate might be $5 a month or something like that. But there was a lot of discussion about how much time it would take to actually measure the 2,200 properties and the staffing that would be required and the costs. So they're submitting for now that it be a one fee per. And I think the select board may be kicking back a little bit on that. So there's some discussion there. But I don't think the map, it would be important, but I don't know that it would be good to have it.
That's fair, and either way, there's enough reference to stormwater to support zoning changes in a bylaw report if we needed to. I was mostly just seeing if this was still really important, did we have a recommended action for it? But it doesn't sound like,
It wouldn't,
if we have one, it doesn't sound like we need it now anyway.
in the long run, it couldn't hurt if we could somehow get a grant to have
But
that done.
because something is not in the plan does not preclude us from talking about it or moving forward with it, right?
Ideally, that may be the way to get it done for the stormwater, is to have to apply for a grant to see if we can get, and I think they can probably do that.
Yeah, these things, and by things I mean these kind of mapping efforts, tend to be done regionally because it makes a whole lot more sense for all of the towns in Chittenden County, let's say, to put money in a pot to have aerial photography done for all of them, and they pay a small piece, and they have aerial photography. Impervious surface is something like that. It can be derived through someone manually interpreting aerial photography, but now more and more it's being done on an automated basis. And UVM is one of the leading places for interpreting aerial photography and converting it into what's impervious and what's not. And I think they may have had a hand in this newest layer. So it's not like the town is likely to go out on its own and say, let's buy impervious surface data just for Shelburne. It would probably be part of a regional effort. And like I said, there is a new layer that Sean McFadden has told me has just come out.
And if that's something, either way, if it does need to be a recommended action, would you be willing to take a look at where that would be best to end up in the plan and how that should be worded? Because otherwise, we'll just move on.
I think we should just move on.
Okay.
I
Just
sense-
what Dean was saying, that there is a new study underway that's looking at flying LiDAR in the entire Lake Flint Basin area by the Spatial Analysis Lab in UVM. And it's going to be about sub-meter level resolution, so about like half a meter by half meter resolution, which I think could
Very
be,
cool.
it's not been
Impressive.
done in this area.
Yeah.
No, my sense is it will be available in a couple of years.
Right,
and
an
maybe
improvement.
Yeah, I think it's coming out
Use
in February or something. They're going to release it because it's the end of the grant dates. Maybe they might get some extension, but
Hopefully around the same time this plan gets approved.
yeah.
So this is the same way thing, like they're flying over the jungles in Central America to find. these
Absolutely.
old-
It's the
Archaeology
same
stuff,
thing,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Sweet.
All right. Another comment as we're going through the historical side is, did we officially change open space fund to conservation fund in the draft? I think the last time I looked at it, it was referred to both in different
That's
places.
a good question. I don't remember that.
That would be one takeaway.
Do you remember?
I don't remember if it was changed, but I know it was a recommendation that we change it, and it would just be a search and replace, I think.
Just want to make sure that actually happens.
I haven't seen it rewritten draft.
Yeah, there were a couple of places at the meeting that I called in for that we had it was the first half of the plan review, and I think there were some there that needed to be updated, but I don't know if that's been done since. Okay. All right. Then, let's see, May.
So I guess along that point, though, or on that point, there's an implication with having search and replace to call something, but the plan by itself isn't going to change its name. That's what I guess I'm trying to wrestle with. Is the idea that?
It's the fund, not the plan.
No, I
Yeah.
understand. It's the words used in the plan when describing the fund. Isn't that what you're saying?
In the plan, when describing the fund, the open space plan, though, which was approved last year, may still refer to it as the open space fund.
But I thought the idea was to change references from open space to conservation fund.
Yes.
Correct.
And so.
In the
Just
town plan.
saying, using the word conservation fund throughout this document will not, it's not like it automatically changes. It's how I certainly want to follow through with this, but it's not changing anything with how it's going to be referred to in the next warning or anything like that.
In the next warning?
Well, when
it's
it's-
not been approved yet.
Right. Well,
Are we talking about approval of the town plan? Because
So we're putting the cart ahead of the horse, in other words?
Exactly.
Like, we need
I kinda
to
think a
get
little
that
bit
passed
because-
before we change the wording in
yeah,
the plan.
I mean, the phrase used in the comprehensive plan is not the path to take to change what we call it, what it is called. I
So
mean,
what's the process?
So if,
When will it be officially changed from
when it
open
goes in
space?
front of the select board, if Gail and the crew
I mean,
point
it's-
out that we changed it,
It's got it's got multiple answers. Like, I mean, we may call it one thing, the select board members may call it another thing, Peter Frankenberg may call it another thing, and it's like, well, which one's really the end answer, what it actually is called?
So,
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand is are they officially proposing to change the name in a particular document?
I guess that's what I'd like to know a little bit
Okay.
better.
I spoke with afternoon about coming before the select board on other issues on the 23rd, is it, of October? Perhaps we can make that request at that point in time, at which point it'll be irrelevant to have that recommendation in, if they approve it. You can take that recommendation away, and it's one less you have to meet next time.
Sure. And my point was less to do with having a recommended action that we change the name. It was more that as we were going through the draft, we talked about, hey, instead of the Open Space
Consistency.
Fund, we should call it the Conservation Fund. And I just wanted to make sure that in the plan draft that we're at least calling it the same thing.
Yeah.
And if it makes it easier, we could make a note at the beginning, the first reference to Conservation Fund, we could say also known as the Open Space Fund or previously called, or however we want to address that.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we actually have to get approval of the select board to make that change.
Well,
Some
again, it's
questions
one
are
of those-
better not asked.
It's usage. I mean, if one group calls it the Conservation Fund, but the future select boards continue to call it the Open Space Fund, and that's what it appears on the ballot as, and then I don't know what you've accomplished.
Well, the
and I-
ballot hasn't been written yet.
Right.
So
So
if
we'll
we
note
can
this.
if we can make a statement about it and have it approved and changed, then it becomes moot, and you can just do a search and replace.
Right. All right. So we'll just note Open
Just have
Space
a
Fund,
note
Conservation
that
Fund,
it
same
has to
thing. And
be-
before we have a final draft, we'll
And
make
be
sure that we're
consistent.
referring to it consistently. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Completed. All right. So when we start getting into the 8:19 evening session, that's when we start talking about the priorities and going
Yep.
through that exercise. Just to throw some thoughts out there, I completely understand the objective behind, or the objective behind suggesting that these recommended actions be prioritized. From an administrative perspective, as long as the recommended actions are in there, they can be referenced by a bylaw change request form. So order really doesn't matter, but the workload order does, how we prioritize what it is that we're going to go through. So for example, we're doing the rural zoning to PUDs change right now. And this was something that, Jamie had a priority plan, and before each meeting, you'd go through and say, okay, what are the hot topics that we need to do? Do we have some time? What topic do we want to bring in now? What have we closed out? So I think that that's something that arguably could be left up to a planning commission, which may be a future one, or if anything, as a potential intermediary to say for each section that has more than 3 recommended actions to at least prioritize the top 3. Just to say, hey, for this section, here are the top 3 that we think are most important in no particular order, so that could then influence the work plan that whatever future planning commission who's iterating through these can then prioritize accordingly. Just as a thought for discussion, if that's a fair approach.
Yeah, my question was about the process, like how has it been done in the past, and like how do you propose that moving forward in terms of?
The previous plan didn't have them prioritized. They were just recommended actions.
No, but I think it's a really good point, right? If you read this document, there's a lot, so, I mean, I feel like as a team, we should potentially be tasked with like pulling out the top 10 from the whole document. And that could be a specific page in the plan too. Called out up front or reiterated later, but, basically saying, here's the top 10, as a planning commission, as we rate this plan, here are the top 10 things we feel like should be addressed.
And yeah, I certainly hear that. And for argument's sake, what weight? I suppose. So
I mean,
let's
that
say,
might be a combination of things we know are easy and simple to do, or
True.
just are maybe hard. But I mean, like, we think these are I don't know what the number is, 5, 10, but it feels like there should be some sense of like, these are the.
And that would be set by this planning commission with current situation and how things are today is what would be driving those priorities. But this is a plan that would be in place for 8 years. So I guess.
But the fear is if you have 300, then
be
you're
modified.
in analysis
Can be
paralysis.
modified. Oh, it certainly
could.
And not, you never do anything because there's too many things to do. So
But I suppose my
it doesn't
point-
ever have to be, it's not like it's fixed in stone and you can never get to number 11 and 12. It's just at a moment in time, we feel like right now, these are the most important things to do.
Sure, and that would certainly be another approach, just to say, of the X number of recommended actions across the various sections in the plan, here are the top 10 that should influence
And I
the
don't-
work plan moving
Right,
forward.
and I don't disagree with your top, I mean, I think that would be, in addition, I think you should have something like prioritizing within each section, the top X
Or
number.
those could be framed as like pressing priorities or something, like that's like,
Well,
we
and
need
that-
urgent attention to kind of like those kind of
That also
issues.
feeds your list, right? So if in every section we have the top 1 to 3, you pull all those out, and now you've got your list that you're gonna then distill from, I don't know how many that would end up being. If we pick 3 from every section. you
Yeah,
know?
and
But then I think it would also be an interesting discussion, I think, for all of us to be like, all right,
And actually, there's a model that we could use or reference, which is Heinsberg's town plan, which I believe they did exactly that. They kind of, said, these are the pressing concerns right now.
and there's a couple considerations here, and the question I would ask is, because that is something that would certainly take a meeting, it would take some time, we'd have to go through each section and prioritize and get consensus on how we want to prioritize. If we did that, does the order of the recommended actions in the plan, would that require any kind of rewarning or, hey, this is a change and we have to go back through this process? Because if that's the case, then I am emphatically against it.
If you're just changing well,
I think it's just a list. We're just drawing up a list to guide us towards what we want to do. We should crack it open every couple months and
Well,
say,
and
where
that's-
are we going here?
And I think that's where if I'm kind of arguing with myself, I think that's where I'm coming from, is that not a decision for the commissioners on whatever planning commission is prioritizing the work that they're approaching?
so
Or
every
do we
year,
want to
there could be an
influence that?
exercise where the commission at that point in time looks and it dumps everything in, it goes through a ranking process, and that's what creates this work plan that Jamie,
Right.
we use for a year. And then the next year, you do it again, or whoever's on the commission, as opposed to doing this initial sorting that Andrew's talking
And it
about.
is absolutely an opportunity where this commission could influence future ones by saying, hey, here's our recommended priority of what we think are the burning issues, and a future commission, especially if they're lazy, could say, yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would offer is that by going from 300 to 30 to eventually 10, you're making the policy of the town clearer. I mean, it's clearer to have 30 things to do than it is to have 300. And it's clearer to have 10.
And that was a criticism of people in the audience. They were concerned that we had too many good ideas. And it was, how are we going to set priorities? That was an area of confusion for the public. So I think there's something
other
worth
thing
it. I would maybe encourage us to just take a peek at how Heinsberg has done it and see if that it has any sort of resonance for us.
I also think like this document's, I mean, obviously I like the document because I invested a lot of my time in it, but it's a pretty weighty thing. And to ask every citizen in town to read the whole thing is probably pretty unrealistic. To have every citizen in town have a bulleted list of this is what the planning commission thinks are the top 10 is something that actually more people will engage with us, engage with the list, and potentially, I mean, it could be chaos for all of us because there could be a lot of disagreement about the top 10.
Brings me back to my other point, is
Yeah.
that if we put together this list and said, hey, here's our priorities, does that open up a whole hornet's nest of now people are going to be debating what the priorities are, and no, we can't pass the plan because we don't agree with this top 10 list that at the end of the day is, quite frankly, irrelevant, because recommended actions are recommended actions, and they can all go into a bylaw report. I agree it would be helpful. I'd like to see it too. And I think we had a hole in the schedule while the select board was doing their hearings, and if we're not tied up with other things, we could certainly go through that exercise of prioritizing and then seeing if we could move that
also-
in without extra hearings.
Pass the buck back to Jamie and pals and say, you're the buck stops with you.
You
You picked the
tell
top
us, right?
10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we'll
You
get the
thought
plan
Jamie thought
approved
he
in
escaped it.
June. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Well, Andrew just said pretty much of what I was going to comment on, but I do think it's a really good way to engage the public Because the public, most of the public is not going to read the plan, even fascinating though it is, because I've read it. And most of the public isn't going to come to a meeting, but they might engage with a shorter list. And also in terms of future planning commissions, I would be very surprised if they wouldn't be grateful to know what a previous group of people thought the priorities were at that time, so.
Absolutely. Honestly, my only hesitation to this is if it's something that's going to inject delay in the
Right.
process, I do not want to do it. If it is something, and I mean, we would certainly be free to do it and say, hey, here's our view of the prioritized work plan, and if that's something that we could add in as a appendix or something like that that doesn't need to go through all that process, then great.
Can it be a separate document that isn't part of the plan? So it's, in other words, it's like
I
in
don't think it
parallel
should
to
be
the
part of
plan?
Well,
I think it should be
yeah,
our
I
working
mean,
document.
Yeah, because each
It
commission
shouldn't-
is going to have its own priorities
you could
based
have
on the
another
current state of
document.
things.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, because I mean, I definitely am sensitive to the fact that I would hate to have put all this time and effort into creating this document and then hit February and be not there. You know, like we've gotten the ball down to the 1 yard line and we suddenly fumble and turn it over. That would be bad. So I wouldn't want to slow the process down. But I mean, I think that this exercise is something we're going to have to do as a group regardless.
We're going to need to put together a work plan regardless.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So
right.
it's a discussion that we need to have. It's just whether or not it physically goes into the plan.
Right.
How about as a suggestion that we can look at the schedule, see where things go, and then we can spend a chunk of a meeting looking at the recommended actions, having that stuff in our packets, and then being able to discuss at the meeting what our priorities look like. And if whether or not we find consensus, let's have that discussion. Worst case, we end up with a list that goes into our work plan that starts once our planning is done. And best case, it's something that we could actually prioritize those recommended actions in the plan and potentially just have a list saying, hey, this commission recommends, here are the priorities that we should move forward with. Is something like that reasonable?
Are we still considering then your other idea of within each section highlighting the kind of top?
Sure, top three. And
I
then
mean, that
you'd
is
almost,
a backdoor way to get there almost, right? So as people go through, but
well, comments from the public did say, you have a lot of recommended actions, prioritize them.
correct.
And the reality is.
Multiple people and multiple tabs,
Right.
yeah.
And the reality is nobody's going to agree on the priorities of all of these things. You're going to have maybe one or two things that everyone says, yes, that's important. Everybody else has their own priority. So I have no issue with the commission coming up with the priority from the commission perspective, and no issue with taking those and building that into a suggested priorities over the foreseeable future kind of process. Like, hey, tackle these things. It wouldn't be binding to any future commission, but it would be a suggestion to use as a guide, which is what the purpose of the plan is.
Well, I mean, if the commission is successful in doing something like the top three within each section, it'll have some momentum. I mean, it won't be binding on the future commissions,
But it would
it'll
raise
have some
visibility.
momentum.
Yep.
I guess I would just say that if you are going to do that exercise of coming up with the top 3 or 4 priorities within each section, just be clear in advance that it's going to be a commission exercise or a hybrid of the commission and the committees, because I think committees are going to be wondering, do they have a role in determining what those are? And you just need to be clear. I don't think there's a wrong way or a right way, but I think you need to be clear, because if you're not clear, it's just going to burn up time. And then getting it done so that if it is going to be part of the plan, we have to let Maya know so that it can be reflected and not dump it on her at the last minute.
Why don't we just ask the various committees to put in a nutshell, what is their, what are their top 3 priorities? So we don't have to figure this all stuff out, and then we can make our own determination. It'll be advisory to us, because that's what those committees are anyway.
Love it.
That
Well,
would
that
help
can-
save some of the work.
That could be another route, and it then makes you dependent on those committees getting that done and then getting it back to you. So you'd be waiting until they come back.
Well, we could invite them, like, by this time, you need to get this back to us, otherwise we'll
sign
make our own decision.
You can certainly do that.
Oh, yeah, adding a
One, two,
page like
three,
that would be
four.
great.
I really like
Well,
this
that's all
idea.
I'm
I think
saying.
that way we'll
Oh, I don't
get
disagree
their
with
feedback.
that. I'm worried about the timeline.
But then we can discuss
Bringing
more.
that together. Yeah, that's good.
So
Okay,
is
so-
that I mean, this end of the table is saying, get the feedback from committees.
Yep, again,
Well, give them the opportunity to give us feedback. I'm not saying
Absolutely.
we're waiting on them.
and this
But
is
the
what
other
I
thing
would
be,
say.
as authors of different sections, well, some of us, did you write any sections? And how did we let that happen? Well,
I
I mean,
was not around in spring.
but I mean,
That
I
was
feel like we should
unfortunate.
probably take the sections we
Trying to
wrote
prevent
Sure.
and pull
climate
them
change
out,
from
and
getting
then we
worse or
can work
something.
with the relevant
Right.
committees too. But
Sure, or even ask the committees that, well, and that's the problem, because committees that meet
Very
once a
good
month,
excuse.
you're already injecting time. So it
Yeah.
would be the sort of thing that if we work out what planning commission meeting we can have this discussion for, we would make sure that that's warned. We would let all of the committees know, hey, if you want to send representatives, email amongst yourselves in groups less than your quorum so that it doesn't violate open meeting laws, and then bring us what your suggestions are so that you can be part of that discussion, and then we can, as far as it going to Maya, yes, there would be some reshuffling, but it wouldn't change volume. It would just
No.
be changing,
I understand, yeah. just
Orientation.
kind of Cutting and paste.
and we would certainly want to get that to her sooner than later as well. Okay, so that's something we can work out. On that same page, there was the mention of Jonathan Harris around
cultural
centers.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's come up a few times, and I believe there are some comments on that later as well. I think per our discussions that we did,
Oh, that's the guy from, yeah, he had some great
we
ideas.
included those concepts as far as recommended actions and things, so I think that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not making that up.
I mean, the backdrop, right, is, I mean, he's got a, I know Jonathan, I like him, so but he's definitely got an agenda, right?
Sure.
But I think what he's trying to propose is good for the area, good for the town. But yeah, so I don't know that we've actually, there's anything specific to his request that's in the actual plan at this point.
I think it was more around the recommended actions of that section that got into the concepts of investigating alternatives such as hamlets or that sort of thing.
You know, he would be somebody who would be great to invite to participate in our PUD study discussions, because I'm just thinking this would be a perfect, like, example of a PUD type, the cultural center, you know, like the Shelburne version of Bread and Puppet, as hard as that may be to
Right.
imagine, conceptualize.
Well, I mean, he has a plan, right? It's the Shelburne Institute. It's, you know, sort of a think tank, and, you know, I mean, it could be very cool. But I don't know where is it? I don't know we call it out anywhere in the plan.
I don't know that we specifically mentioned cultural centers, but it was in,
My sense of what he was saying is that the historic and cultural resources section, the cultural resources are focused or seen as focusing in the village, and he thinks that there could be cultural resources throughout the town, and so don't limit it to just the village. So, yeah, the question would be, well, where would you put the language that says you're supportive of cultural experiments like that throughout the town, not just in, but if they're not cultural resources yet, then
but would it
you could put it in
be,
future land use.
well,
He was specifically calling out the rural district.
That's what
I think it
thought
was
too.
specifically
Yeah.
in the rural district
Yeah.
around the concept of, hey, you know, could we have a hamlet that then, as a thought, there could be a cultural center as part of that with things around it, and what would that look like? And that would fall under a PUD type discussion, which
yeah.
I think would be well worth
Just like a
having.
hamlet could be a PUD type, you know?
Right. And then there was a recent memo from Pam as well around using the word hamlet, right, from the housing committee?
From,
they
Yeah,
were
one of her
red.
comments later on, she talks about striking that.
Right, and that was something that, yeah, I think I noted that as well to discuss. So this is specific to the rural district section. and it would be the language that we used around exploring alternatives such as hamlets to control density and maintain open space. And as much as I would love to recite this from memory, I don't know where everything is off the top of my head. And maybe we can just take that as another note of something to look into.
Did you write the rural district section? Or is future land use?
Part of land use?
Kind of, I did future land use and
Right.
And
transportation,
this is
so,
the rural, this is the outside of the growth area. It's the third part of the future land use section. That's where things are right now.
Right.
And so it seems like the recommended actions in the outside of the growth area portion of the future land use chapter may be where this would go. And so if the note is to work on developing a recommended action that addresses Jonathan Harris's idea, and it would be a number 10 here, or it would be editing one of these, you know, we can work on that between now and the next time. I don't know that you need to, or assign the task, but I don't know that you want to try to edit it right now.
No, not to try to edit it now. My first question was, do we have language in there that covers it? Even if it doesn't
Yeah,
specifically
well-
say cultural center?
Yeah,
Like-
and I was turning here first in hopes of finding something that you could possibly cite as, well, Jonathan, your idea is embedded in this. You know, so this establish right to farm provisions to acknowledge presence of right to continue agricultural uses in areas. It just, I think it could probably go.
Because there is something that talked about, it did mention hamlets by name. It was in this section, I thought.
So will they say engage the community in identifying the kind and extent of scenic resources? So you can also say like scenic and cultural resources.
Yeah.
like that.
Well, so maybe
Yeah,
as a
that's
note, that's
different.
something that we
But
might
that's-
want to come up with something that could be added. And this is where, now that we're at the point that we are, I know that the select board may have comments and their public reviews may solicit comments as well. How much does changing the language now complicate that process versus just having a list of things that, as things come up, added into that discussion?
I wouldn't suggest that we take things to Maya to edit before going to the select board.
Right.
So I
So we
think
should
that-
just have a list of things
right.
that,
We have a marked up version.
yes, okay. All right. Okay. And maybe maybe we could get together early next week and just have a list that we have to keep in mind as we're going through the select board process and
Yep.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything back from Lee concerning this idea of them making their comments in advance. So
Right.
kind of working along those same lines.
Right. Okay, so we'll add that one to the list. And that takes us to the last page before comments from email and in person. Yeah, and we already talked about priorities. So unless anybody else did, I didn't have any other comments or observations going into the email notes. If we want to start there, and move into that.
On emails.
Yeah. Let's see.
Sorry, I'm sorry, catching up. Where are you now as far as the comments?
Getting into the emails.
Page 43.
Got it.
Yeah.
Did you skip over Kevin's one already?
Nope.
Okay.
I saw it. I didn't, I mean, there are good ideas in there. I'm open to however discussion needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, one thought I had on that one was that when I was at a select board meeting a while ago, they were looking at kind of, economic development and how do you grow businesses sort of thing. One of the name, like Perry, who used to be on here, this was one of the things he talked a lot about. Remember when he was looking at economic development? And I think they were going to try and put together a group that would look at that sort of thing. How do you make Shelburne a more attractive place? One of the things that came up in our discussion at Shelburne Farms in the house the other night, like I threw out the idea where I grew up in Northwest Connecticut, there's a little town called Woodbury, which has a whole ton of antique stores. And I asked my dad as a kid, like, it seems kind of dumb. Why would they all open next to each other? Aren't they competing with each other? And he said, no, the more you have, the more people come and they actually work. And so like the question was, how do you, what would be the thing you'd put in Shelburne to make Shelburne more of a destination? We have a kind of agri-tourism thing going down with Gale at the south end of town with wine and beer and pizza and liquor and chocolate and whatever else is going on there. But, those sort of things. But, I think as that part grows, I mean, you guys kind of have enough parking, but it feels like that center of town piece doesn't. Like whether it's someone like a group assigning someone like Perry to say, can we task you to look at this? Because I do think that's one of these big Achilles heels in town, that if you're coming up with a priority list of top 10, like this should be potentially on our top list of things.
Yeah, and I did have some mixed views because there are areas where, yes, parking is short if you want to park and walk no more than 20 feet. But there is, and this is, I mean, certainly not a knock on the comments here specifically, but in terms of talking about areas in the village and not having enough parking, not to be controversial, but is there parking in the shopping center that's open and people just don't want to park there and walk across the green or something? Or do we legitimately have a parking problem where I go downtown and I drive around for 15 minutes on the odd day because I can't find a spot? That never happens in Shelburne. It's more a factor
Other
of how
than,
lazy
yeah,
I'm feeling.
Farmers market days. Maybe.
Right, and I
Yeah.
go park in the Shelburne Shopping Center, and I've never not gotten a spot there. So
Right.
the parking is not an issue for the farmers market unless you want to park right there, get out, and put food in your face. Like, I think there's a.
Well, but I think I think the argument would be more along the lines of, yes, you and I know that, but if you're coming through Shelburne and just kind of want to check some stuff out, and you
Right.
kind of turn and go down Falls Road, and there's like 6 spots here and 8 spots there, and they're all gone, you might be like, nah, keep going, or so.
And the solution there could be parking signs.
Right.
Right.
Wayfinding,
Like,
for
yeah,
sure.
wayfinding.
But anyway, it occurred to me, like, as we're looking at this economic development, like, that should be a group that should be a component of it, probably.
It certainly should, and I know my sarcasm gets the better of me sometimes. I'm not suggesting that there isn't an issue, but
Right.
I just want to make sure that let's make sure there actually is an issue, and are there creative ways that we can work with what we have? We already know, based on lots of comments, that in the village area, right at the corner of Falls and 7, that there's been topics about having a path there, and that would disrupt parking. So there, potentially at some point that could be reworked or revisited, however that goes down. But these are all discussions that need to happen. They're not things that are going to get solved in the plan. And I think in the plan we do have comments about recommended actions around parking studies and leveraging what's been done in the past, and how do we ensure that there is adequate parking.
Yeah, there is a policy, there is language that talks about updating the parking and transportation study that was done in 2000, and that was the last comprehensive look at the issue of parking. It's been a subject of survey questions, the first and the second survey that we did. Somewhat surprisingly, there wasn't the kind of response from people filling out the survey that I thought. I thought people would say that, yeah, we do need more parking. The concern expressed about the lack of the parking tends to come from merchants who are feeling like their fates are better off when there is that parking close proximity. There isn't a consensus. I mean, a lot of people feel like if you have a developed environment like this one of the last things you want to do is dedicate that valuable space to places for cars, some people will say. Mm-hmm. So
And I do absolutely understand the challenge there with
Well,
local
on-street
business.
parking can also help tremendously with traffic calming,
Slows
which
things
is a
down, yeah.
huge issue, particularly if you read Front Porch Forum. So, yeah, I think this is worth some study. Maybe, recommending that an ad hoc committee be created to take a look at, some of these issues. If we can get Perry to spearhead it, I don't know.
But there is a parking section in the plan. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
that's the
There is,
thing
and we
that-
do have recommended actions around it. And
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
kind of the balance where we're looking at feedback from people. And yes, these are very good points, but
Yeah.
if we already have this in the plan, there's no need to
This
Visit
is
everything.
actually, I mean, I wrote that section. We go
Right.
into, I go into a fair amount of detail about this.
Exactly.
So,
So we recognize that it's a challenge.
Yeah.
We do have recommended actions around it. Okay.
I mean, if there's an appetite to do something about it sooner rather than later, then I would recommend,
And we'll
an
add that
ad
to the
hoc
priority list. And
Well,
committee
I think
to
anybody who's
tackle
looking
it.
at economic development for Shelburne is gonna have to, they're gonna talk to all the existing business owners. If that's one of their number one complaints, it's gonna have to be dealt with and addressed. But, I think that's the place to do it.
And there are valid concerns in that email and suggestions around, there lost parking around the train station area and
Yeah, the
what's
library.
happening with the library is removing some spots. So completely valid there.
I don't think the fireman's gonna come save him anytime soon if he wants to move them, though.
So, all right, then,
And Donna and I had our nice email exchange.
yep.
I mean, there's definitely some about require versus allow the DRB. And, in our emails, I just said, this is probably going to have us discuss that because we've gone back and forth on this a lot. And some of that, I don't, were you going to say something about parking? Did we not let you?
I don't want to burden you with it. I was just going to suggest that some of the problems I see with parking is that there's spotty parking and it's in front of businesses. And so some businesses get very protective of that. And so it doesn't become town parking. It becomes their parking. And so that's just something that could be addressed in that.
Well, and at the expense of pedestrian safety and that sort of thing. So, yeah, and we need a comprehensive plan. But a lot of it is also just, I think, changing people's mindsets about, some of how this works and, and I think if we can kind of interrelate some of the stormwater and all that, it would help make people see that, this is all interrelated and it all adds up to, a kind of more valuable whole. So
wayfinding that
wayfinding, yeah. I mean, this, I'm wondering if some kind of an economic development, / tree advisory group, Gail Henderson King is a landscape architect. I mean, she's very knowledgeable on some of these issues. I think may have actually worked on one of the previous parking studies.
The SBPA has been interested in
Yeah,
economic development as an issue, both, and has people who are willing to work on it, I think.
yeah, so that's, I was thinking an ad hoc community, committee that could have representatives representing various viewpoints and, kind of add up to some solution that works for everybody.
I agree.
Yeah.
So, and also that balances out in the plan, there's a lot of reference to increasing pedestrian and bike accessibility and wayfinding and that sort of thing. So that's, all of these things could reduce the amount of parking that is actually required as well. Or if you make it more inviting to walk, then other parking becomes more feasible than it might be today.
And we just use what we have more efficiently.
Exactly.
Which is, part of what you were saying,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree with that. I don't know why Don sent me this now that I think about it, because it was all future land use, which was sort of Kate's bailiwick, so
Oh,
I don't know if,
And
if
in,
you just want to look at some of the,
I think I got this too, and I think it was at the time we were talking about this.
yeah, so I just don't, now I don't know off the top of my head how many of those actually did or did not get adopted at the time versus
Thought we
are
would change
outstanding.
some.
this is from August, so it might not be, I mean, I'm thinking probably it's not. I mean, I can take a look at that. I don't know why that was sent to you, but,
I think because he has my email address.
oh, well, here's mine too. And he lives behind me, so,
Yeah.
anyway. You know what, I think it was you had offered to, you had talked about being the sort of editor, so I think
Yeah.
that's people have
Because
just
at
been.
that point it had been
Yeah.
done, yeah.
So,
Yeah. Okay, well, I am happy to take that, and then I'll add Jonathan Harris's comments, see if I can find a way to fit that in about the cultural center thing too. And then, we can just take a look at that language, right, next time.
and then that could be something, if nothing else, potentially during the next meeting, we could talk through
Yeah.
that. Okay. Then the Bay Road Resident Committee, we discussed all of that with the subsequent meeting with them and
Yeah.
went through all of these concerns.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think they're in a pretty good place.
Yep, and then unless anybody else had comments, I just had a question mark under the last comment. I wasn't sure what implications for social capital.
Well, that's a good question. I asked Michael, because I spoke with him, to try to elaborate, and he said he would try to send something. I haven't received it. I know he has been a member of the Water Commission and has been involved with some community things. I know that quality of life is, as a concept, is something that he has a very strong interest in, and a kind of an academic interest in, and evidently also in social capital. But he didn't really do anything more than fill out a card and write verbatim what you see there.
And that's fair, and I think we do have some themes in there in terms of, encouraging biking and walking and being healthy and creating sense of place
Well, and
and
social
that sort of
gathering.
thing.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think he's talking about placemaking, basically. It's just sort of
Right.
an academic way to put it.
And if that's the case, then I'm comfortable that we have those references in the plan. If there's something specific, then I would encourage Michael to
Yeah.
provide some more detail if the plan doesn't have it.
No, I think everything's kind of converging.
Right. All right, so we've got a list to work through. Do you want to move on to the housing comments? If we do that, did you all have any more comments before going on to the housing? Or are we, okay, just checking. Okay. So this was the one about removing the reference to hamlets, and figured this would be a good one to discuss. If we don't want to just use, I could understand that language is basically suggesting experiment using rural hamlets. We could alternatively phrase that as look into
Possibility of
creative ways
developing.
such as rural hamlets or something, to not say that that is the only thing to experiment with. So that could be reworded to say experiment with concepts such as rural hamlets or other means. I wonder if that would be okay.
I kind of liked her suggestion, honestly. I don't know why we have to call out Hamlet specifically there in the very beginning.
I would change planning concepts to settlement patterns. It just suggests more physical design, which is,
Right.
kind of a little more prescriptive, a little more like there's an end product. Planning concepts is,
I like your comment too.
Keeping it as is, or does the settlement patterns work?
or settlement types or something like that.
Right, but if you like her suggestion and Kate just modified it, are you okay with the terminology that Kate was using?
Settlement patterns?
Instead
Yeah, or
of
types
planning
or something like
concepts?
that. It's more consistent with the kind of PUD thing that we're going for.
It does. I think my reluctance to just remove hamlets outright had more to do with the fact that as a concept, that is something that has been being discussed for a while, and I wouldn't want to inject confusion by being more vague, but I'm okay. I mean, it still satisfies the same.
I think A1
Drive.
implies a larger group of homes than what we can actually acquire or do in the rural district, the soils or so forth. But if we somehow find an area that's large enough where you can put 15 or 20 together, maybe we can come up with a concept where we even do row houses and a couple of cottages and then incorporate some of the ideas about, you know, maybe a larger structure for what we were talking about
Cultural.
earlier,
Yeah, cultural center.
right? But to just target hamlets in general, I don't think it's really functional for our rural district.
Okay. Well, if we're all good with the suggested rewrite, but saying settlement patterns instead, that works.
Yeah.
Okay. The next comment was, well, there was a comment on the next
Wants to
page.
strike the number, the 25 to 50, right?
I remember we had a big discussion.
We did. I don't know that I feel strongly about it, other than to say that it's nice to have the context, because that was the exercise that was gone through.
I think we struggled, though, to find a
We-
number, so
we
maybe
did.
we don't need a number.
Yeah, I'm really indifferent. If we're okay with keeping the strike through, is there any reason to retain
Well,
it?
you don't, I mean, as plans go, there aren't very many numbers, not nearly as many numbers as you might. You did go through the exercise of trying to determine what has the historic amount of rate of growth been.
I would argue for keeping the numbers in. I think it gives you kind of like a benchmark.
An order of magnitude.
and
An idea.
Trends that we looked at when we were looking at these numbers for the last 5-10 years.
And it's not a requirement. It's not saying you have to have this. This
I want to
is,
keep it just because I went through so much. It
Yeah.
was
There
just
you
so
go.
painful for me to get to that number that, yeah. I mean, because I feel like people
That's
want to
reason
know,
enough.
like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
right? And
I
so,
agree.
and it was vague enough to kind of not be pinned down to like feeling like we know exactly what's going to
Narrow.
happen, but it was a range that is entirely likely.
okay. Are
So,
we?
okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. How about all of a sudden Route 7 becomes the hot place where everybody wants to live? I know, just work with me here. And we have a couple of apartments that want to go in. And then we also have, you know, phase 2 of Quinniasca or something like that. I mean, we could potentially find ourselves running up against this, but
But we're
Yeah.
not saying you can't go above 50.
Yeah.
What we're saying is you can't exceed the planned rate of expansion of community facilities and services.
It's just running average.
How about saying
Right.
which currently translates to 25 to 50?
yeah, that works for me.
Gives us
currently.
a,
Yeah,
a
okay.
frame of reference. So we'll add currently.
Okay, currently, because, yeah, things can change.
I mean, the point was more the fact that there are constraints on growth that have to do things like sewer and school and now the stormwater management systems.
But it's just, but there's a sort of an assumption that that's single-family house type growth, which we're kind of getting into different types of housing,
Right.
I think, so I just want it to be, you know, it's flexible.
I mean, group housing isn't defined in the plan. So those apartments, you know, it could be that they go in at 2/5 of a unit. So 2.5 for every one could be a pretty sizable apartment complex and still qualify, so.
Well, from what we're saying though, are we all okay if we just add the word currently?
Yeah, currently works for me.
it's good.
Okay. Then the next, number 9, requiring seeming aggressive, especially given the objective, begins with the word promote. I would say that these are two separate points in number 9 that both apply to the overall goal of the section. I don't think that what is being promoted is innovative and creative development layouts. What would be required is new construction to generate a majority of, or a majority of the portion of the energy it uses. Is how I read that. Not to say that's right or wrong, but just for discussion.
Yeah, this one didn't ring as necessary to change to me.
There could certainly be
I would make some changes. That's the part I'm not concerned about, is what she's highlighted. I would say promote use of innovative and creative development layouts and design techniques so that buildings fit their landscape and setting. Not who cares about the construction. It's what the stuff looks like. And then you could say a period and then require new construction to generate a majority of the portion of the energy it uses. Or maybe it's just be, not generate, but, I mean, what if they want to, you know, tie into an off-site energy facility somewhere? I mean, because that's, you know what I mean? That seems overly restrictive. What's Asim, you're the expert on this.
Well,
What's
so
the best way to
those are
put it?
typically like known as like you reduce the energy footprint of the building or something like that. Like
Okay.
have buildings be kind of like green and lean kind of.
Yeah.
So I've seen both of those discussions. So.
Require new construction to minimize the energy footprint.
Yeah.
Does that work? Is that,
Mhm.
and then that, like, we're not telling you how to do it, you just need to
Yeah.
somehow figure it out how to do it?
So minimize energy footprint as meaning the energy usage?
Yeah, I
Or
don't know, Asim will explain.
Okay, I mean, Jason, I guess I would leave it to you to address this issue of, you know, the whole concept of meeting 90% by 2050, or Judy's not here anymore. I mean, there needs to be generation. That's the fundamental, that's the truth of the law, is that if we're gonna meet those goals, there has to be generation. It's not gonna be conserved, we're not gonna meet that goal by just conserving.
There does, and
Construction, design.
Yeah, I think design techniques. So that it
yeah, it
fits.
could.
Yeah.
All of that
You
is
know, and
covered in the
design or
energy
something like
section.
that.
This is the housing section.
Innovative
And I can certainly see issues with saying that, hey, we're
design.
similar to the point that was made somewhere that we want to mandate rooftop solar on
Yeah.
any new residential construction. I mean, if you're building in an area that's shaded 95% of the day, it makes no sense to put solar on the roof. So that could be a little bit harsh. So there needs to be something to soften it, but not something that's so soft that people could say, yeah, I live in it's 100% sunny all the time, but I'm not going to do it because you have this thing that says you don't have to do it. And I feel the same way about this. I think it does make sense to have new construction generate at least a portion, if not a chunk. But I think a lot of these concepts are addressed in the energy section, so I'm okay if they're.
It says a majority, I mean, would it be enough to address the concern by saying some portion rather than a majority? I mean, it seems like that's what people would be balking at.
Yeah, maybe that's the sticking, maybe the problem is the
Well,
word majority.
The cynic in me says, okay, I'm going to build a building and have a stationary bike that's hooked up to power a light bulb, and every day somebody get on it for 10 minutes, and I'm
Right,
generating a
but
portion.
But the rubber hits the road in the energy section.
It does, and I think that's where
I mean, this could come out of the housing section entirely.
it could either that or to do what was suggested where we minimize energy footprint, because that's something that I
Gotcha.
think could be
Gotcha,
enforced
gotcha.
during a DRB review or something, to say, well, yeah. So to replace the generate a majority of the portion of energy it uses with new construction to minimize energy footprint? Maybe consistent with the energy section?
Yeah, I think something like that, or consistent with the state's goals of energy consistent with the state renewable energy goals, because that's already like an act.
Which is a large
Like
chunk
the
of
Act
what the
46
energy
or
section
whatever
is
that is,
based
yeah.
on, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. we're almost out of this section. So for Mary, it would be replacing generate a majority of the portion of the energy it uses with minimize the energy footprint consistent with the energy section of this plan. Is that agreeable?
And then up above, Kay did not add, instead of construction, maybe having
Have
design.
design.
Yeah.
Or
Which-
siting techniques or something like that.
Well,
development
design
layouts.
techniques could imply construction as well. You're not, I mean, if you
Yeah,
design something that
it's-
would include,
You know, that's roof lines and,
Mhm.
and the pitch of the roof and, you know, direction of the roof. There's a lot of things with that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Okay.
We could do design and construction if you want.
So the next one was,
So
rec-
is it,
Design
is
and
it
construction.
changing construction to design, or is it design and
I
construction?
think we're adding maybe design and construction.
Okay.
okay.
We covered the waterfront.
All right, so the next one is recommended action 3. I was just going to suggest changing the word adopt to consider, if that,
What if we just mandate for roof solar and
Which
improved
one's
insulation?
tied to it?
because
Oh, yeah.
mandating rooftop solar, there are places where that may not make sense at all. So, I mean, this is a recommended action for a future commission to have this whole discussion.
Mhm.
I was just looking for a way to perhaps soften the language that facilitates a future discussion but doesn't create adversity, like, I mean, suggesting to change the
What if you
point.
just adopted a mandate for solar siting? So that somebody could do it in the future if they wanted to, or not if they don't want to.
Well, and we do have a lot of that covered in the energy section as well.
Hmm.
Well,
Isn't that what they just did in California?
And what if we do mandate it for commercial buildings, that they put some solar on the roof?
well, they also have more sun than we do, but wasn't that going for 100% by 2040 or something? It wasn't necessarily mandating, or was it?
For which one?
California? Either way.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we borrowed it from.
Right.
I can't remember all the details.
So we have.
But I mean, yeah, I mean, it was more, but the key thing too, right, it's not just solar, it's this improved insulation and air filtering that's
Yeah.
really important. I kind of like going out with adopt a mandate myself, and it could always be soft, I mean, let someone else soften it. Select board.
That's true. That's what the recommended action is. That's
Yeah.
not saying you have to do it.
The select board might not, I mean, that could be a discussion point.
If mandates, too much of a dog whistle, adopt requirements for rooftop solar?
Right. It's interesting, she wants to mandate a density bonus, but not this. Like, she wants to strengthen one and soften the other.
Well, and there's also the email that just came out recently from her. She had some thoughts around housing topics, so we were going to add that onto a future meeting. Maybe
Yeah,
we
they
could.
want to come to you to talk about those sort of changes.
Right. So maybe we could. I mean, we could.
I like Dean's suggestion, adopt
Requirement?
requirements for rooftop solar. That sounds,
Let's start there and see where it goes. Okay. Seeing my other note, I mean, if it was adopt a mandate, it could be in areas that are whatever it was described as, level 1, level 2, per the Regional Planning Commission maps.
Right.
Like there was high priority
Oh, yeah.
areas, secondary areas, and up in the air areas.
So do you want to insert that?
I couldn't stop myself from saying it out loud because I saw my note. Sorry.
So no.
No, I mean, that's something that could fit into adopt requirements. That would be a natural progression of that.
Agreed.
Okay. And do we want to talk about the density bonuses? Or is that comment? That's,
Should just basically say instead of consider, it's now mandated.
no, the other comment, sorry.
Where is it?
Where are you? Oh, number 8.
Yeah.
Oh, why not mandate?
Yeah. We only say consider if she wants to mandate.
Thoughts?
She's softening one, strengthening the other.
Right.
I don't want to mandate that for the same reason
Yeah.
we took it off the other one.
And we do have density bonuses, and this is a constant discussion as we're going through right now with the rural PD discussion, so.
How about change consider to establish? If you establish density bonus, you typically have to earn the bonus.
Well,
And if you, I mean, establish, maybe that's not different enough from mandate, but it wasn't saying that you are putting a gun to your own heads to say, we have to change the zoning regs now and to put in density bonuses, because that's kind of what mandating has bonuses to say.
I've got brain lock.
I'm good with establish. I like it.
Okay.
Mandate
Works
is
for
not-
me.
Seems like a nice middle ground.
Yep.
All right, so that is housing. So now the planning grant, which
So if we are moving on
Pretty-
to the next
yep.
agenda item.
I think so. That was the last comment.
Fabulous.
Do we want to do Robbie's first so he doesn't have to hang around any
You
longer?
certainly could do that.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah,
switch
I-
it. Let's
I
switch
told
it.
him.
Yeah.
It's like, do you want to?
And we have Ellen as well. Thank you, Gil.
I'm happy to do that.
All right, so we'll do the planning grant next. All right. So the memo.
Just seems like a kind thing to do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Full disclosure, I have my accessory zoning permit for him, so I just want to make clear that was not due to that, so, yeah. Yeah,
You're safely in the
my
public
Jamie
hearing.
Hines moment there.
So, I mean, I think the memo has provided some background. This has been a recent issue that for, I would say, it seems like half of the applications that go in front of the DRB now, it triggers site plan review, triggers therefore 1900.7, which requires pedestrian facilities of some sort, depending on the district. But there is some there's some opaqueness with what exactly that entails. And I think that especially before next week's DRB meeting, it'd be great to I guess straighten up some things. And I know that since Alan is here as well, he's also very curious about what exactly this entails, especially for his application, since it is at the final plan and will be heard on Wednesday. So I guess I'm not really sure how I should approach this, especially because my brain is beginning to shut off.
Yeah.
Did you have any questions or comments to note first before we dig into the text of 1900.7 and also possibly ways that you thought of or possibly ways that I've thought of in clearing up the text?
Yeah, I was thinking just based on the conclusion that you had. One of the first one was a definition of alternative facility, and if we look at that part of the memo, actually, if you just want to go back up to that.
Right here, or up to?
Yeah, I was just looking at iterate through the conclusions, but starting with
Sure.
alternative facility.
Sure.
If the language that was causing problems said a facility such as a path, then a suggestion would be to add which enables non-motorized transportation options like bike ped to connect to other areas in town. If that clarifies anything. Or was the,
Kind of.
well, because I think that part of the question is that what is the purpose of it? And the other part is what is a path versus multi-use path versus a sidewalk versus,
Yeah, and I think that that's the alternative facility entails all of that. Multi-use path, trail, anything that facilitates multimodal transportation, but isn't necessarily a sidewalk. But this alternative facility, since it's sort of alluded to but not clearly defined in terms of text in Article 22 or 21 or design standards, that possibly some clarity on those aspects would be helpful.
If I can just interject, keeping my eye on the clock as well, and recognizing that we're in a situation where it could get a little bit dicey if there's conjecture about how the regs could change. There's a hearing, it's been warned, it's been continued. Nothing that anybody says tonight can be represented as meaning anything individually, and the body can't really speak unless you adopt a motion, and you really shouldn't adopt a motion to signal to the DRB something. You really should send someone there who could testify. So I think I would suggest that Robbie wrote a memo to draw your attention to some issues and concerns. Make sure that you understand what he's saying, but don't try to figure out what the answers are going to be tonight, because it's late. And secondly, there may be the temptation on the part of anybody to say, well, but this is where they were, this is what they meant. And that's not what your rule is right now. The bylaw has to speak for itself. I mean, unless someone wants to go and testify, that's what you would need to do in front of the DRB rather than have a conversation, well, this is what we think we might do. Well, that doesn't really mean anything.
right, and the challenge is, as Alan explained, is that there's, if you're in the final stages of this approval process, you're up against either having to fund a $75,000 sidewalk or what is an alternative path. And I think that was my comment that, feel free to watch this later because there couldn't be a decision made, was exactly because of what you were just saying, is that we can't make a decision tonight. The testify makes sense. I'm not actually sure how we could, outside of somebody showing up and actually testifying to say, hey, here's what the spirit of the discussion was, if this came from did this come from this commission? That
Well, the
language?
planning commission prepared the amendments that changed the regs, that resulted in the new language in section 1900 and the addition of the table.
When was that?
That was in May of 2017, I think. Ish.
Yep.
Were we attempting to strengthen them?
Clarify.
Yeah, Kate may be able to speak to this the best, but I think that
Strengthen and clarify. Just be, and bring multimodal transportation on more parity with vehicular transportation, because particularly our main concern was in, well, everywhere in the town, but specifically in the growth area. And this was something that the DRB, when Mary was chair, came to us and said, this is an area of confusion for us.
Right.
So that was one of the things that instigated it.
And that's where this language came from, and we had a lot of these discussions at the time, and I think it was written so that the DRB could have the latitude that it needed, but recognizing that it would,
Soften
there
a
would be
mistake.
issues that came up, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing that happened that was unforeseen was that the paths map, which would have updated a lot of this information in terms of locating where we wanted to have facilities, that ran into problems and was ultimately not passed. So if the DRB is looking for direction, they have a 2007 official paths map to look at, which is not very sort of forthcoming about where these things would be located. So, they're left to kind of weigh that, okay, this is a growth area of the town, and maybe this is what is meant, and, so I am working with the PAS committee right now on where we're going to be working towards a new paths map that clarifies some of this information. And actually also shows the zoning districts so that that part is clear.
And how about the cost? You talk about that at all? Who's paying for this?
Usually
It
the
sounds like
developer, usually the developer.
So well, there are a lot of individual homeowners in Shelburne, right? It's not all developers.
No, but typically towns, when a developer comes in and there's an area that needs it, oftentimes that's the direction it goes. I'm not saying that's,
Right. I understand that, and I agree with you. I think that's good. I'd like to see that. I think in the case of an individual homeowner, it's not appropriate to make them pay the cost of a sidewalk.
It would,
And
yeah,
I don't know, where you guys live, if you have a sidewalk in front of your house, but imagine if the town suddenly dictated that you needed to spend $75,000 to put in a sidewalk. in front
Well,
of your
it's
house.
a requirement of development, not of just living there.
I understand.
Yeah. So I think that's an important distinction.
I think it's important for everybody to keep in mind that the reason that the Planning Commission included the language giving the DRB the authority to require an alternative facility in lieu of the sidewalk is so that an individual homeowner subdividing a lot would not be spending $75,000 to build a sidewalk.
but that there could be like an easement or something for a path or something
could
at a
be
future
a
date or whatever.
It could be, the language in the regs is such as a path, and that could take different forms, but it seems to be reasonably clear that it's something that would be separate. But yeah, something other than a sidewalk. Sidewalks can cost, depending on how complex they are, 100 to 200 feet a foot. A path can be built for less.
Right.
The easements can be problematic also. So in front of my house, that will require almost 50 feet in my lot currently. Off the road.
No, I mean, I liked your idea earlier of, I live in the general vicinity. I drive by there all the time, every day, basically, and it would be a little strange to look on the left side of Spear Street as I'm heading south there and think, okay, well, there's a sort of orphaned stretch of sidewalk. But I like the idea of, that there are other places in town that need paths and are looking for funding, that this idea of, okay, I'd rather contribute to something that benefits the whole town than something that, to your point, has to be maintained since they're looking orphaned. It does seem like we've ended in a ridiculous sort of
No common sense,
outcome. Yeah.
in my opinion.
But I mean, that's what I was trying to think, all right, when we say path or the thing, like, is there some connectivity from your, to Mech Farm that would allow someone to get somewhere? Is there a way to connect parcels of land so that someone who's a pedestrian or biking kids from Mech Farm now have a way to get somewhere? Is there any other solution? But there's not really any other there to get to out there either, really.
I was really struck by the last sentence in Ravi's kind of like memo about the other solution to kind of like
Yeah.
whether DRB would benefit from having the planning commission confirm whether accepting cash payment in lieu of a facility construction may be included in the town zoning bylaws.
Right.
I think that's really a good option where kind of like you can prioritize at the community scale construction of or maintenance of these paths and multimodal options and kind of like facilitate the network connectivity of those and take the facility and encourage the cash transfers.
Well, and I think that falls into what your intro comment was, is that we're not, these points need to be discussed, they need to be hashed out, they need to be warned, they need to be put together. Like, when we start getting into having impact fees and that sort of thing, that's something that we can recommend to the select board. They would
But
still need to.
it's not part of the
approve this.
bylaws.
Yeah.
Right, it's not. Then that's what I'm saying, like, there isn't an answer that we can come up with right now. This definitely needs to be discussed in more detail. I know that I've got thoughts on all of these things and I'd love to share them. I don't know that now is the time necessarily, but what is so aside from testimony in this particular case, what is within the DRB's purview to be able to bring closure to the discussion?
Well, the DRB's purview is to make it the decision, and their obligation is to apply the regulations, but they will interpret the regulations the way they interpret the regulations, and I don't want to speculate or say out loud where I think they're going to go, but I'm not sure that there's we'll only know after decision is reached whether or not there's a big problem to be solved, a huge problem to be solved, or a small problem to be solved, at least as it relates to this one particular application. Or maybe no problem to be solved. But there's a larger problem to be solved, and I think that's what's motivated Ravi to write the memo, because when he started, he said this has come up on more than one occasion.
And I think this started around a very large development in the concept of trying to integrate paths through town, and the problem that it doesn't matter what map a paths committee comes up with saying, hey, here's a proposed route, you can't please all the people all the time, but you have to start somewhere. And the idea, and I think there was a specific discussion around Irish Hill about, well, who wants a sidewalk there or whatever. You're going to have one property that just has a path and then the others don't. And it's the thing that, well, over time, at least if there's easements or if there's a theoretical line, then you could get there eventually. It may just not be real soon. So
We took an easement on Dorset Street, the O'Brien subdivision. And that's still there with the idea that hopefully it would hook up someday with South Burlington's path, which they have not brought further south. So that was an easement, but I don't know if the reg is still.
Is it on Barstow?
No, it's on Dorset, or Spear.
Which one?
The O'Brien subdivision. Dorset.
Dorset and Barstow?
Dorset.
Yeah.
Yeah, it starts at Barstow and it goes up to the town line.
Right.
That was at 15 or 20 feet.
I don't remember what the O'Brien project resulted as far as easements. I'm
Yeah, it
not
was
really
on the
remembering
DRB.
anything.
It was on the DRB when we did that one.
So for this, recognizing where we are, I mean, I think the only action that the commission can take is,
Go to work.
well, there's definitely that. This definitely needs to go through a lot and using these examples, and thank you for putting this in perspective. But would be to see if somebody could be there for testimony so you could ask questions to have the opinion of a commissioner. I mean, it wouldn't be a new reg or anything.
Yeah, I think for the DRB, that would be helpful at that time. Just to understand the interpretation of these bylaws, the intent of these bylaws, as well as the intent of alternative facility as well. And what that would entail. I think we go back to page 2 regarding alternative facilities, that with Allen's, as well as another subdivision proposal that alternative facility could also include the expanded shoulder, and whether that is an alternative facility, whether that is not, because based on what is put in the bylaws, one could argue that it includes a widened shoulder, and that one could widen the shoulder by 5 feet, and that would be still considered an alternative facility. So some clarity and justification on what these bylaws are intended to do, and especially what the vision behind it would be helpful for the DRB, especially next week.
Well, I would say since this started out with talking about being faced with paying $75,000 for a sidewalk, that is not how I would read this, because nothing is saying that you have to build a sidewalk there. There is the alternative facility path, so we're not talking about that cost, so.
Well, the DRB at the previous meeting in the summer actually approved my project verbally. And then after that meeting, there was another meeting with one of your commissioners who stated that the widened shoulder was not an adequate alternative facility. So then I got a letter in the mail saying that that was not adequate. So I'm back to the sidewalk right now.
And not that I want to sow confusion or anything like that, but I suppose that would be a decision at the.
I don't think that was ever the,
DRB.
that was
I
never,
don't think that was the.
that was never the intent of the reg, to have extended shoulders. That doesn't replace sidewalks or paths.
Well, I've looked there for.
We're interested in off-road facilities, and maybe that's one of the clarifications that could be made here. And that's one of the clarifications that the Paths Committee intends to make in their new map, is that it's an off-road facility. What that actually means in that particular area, the DRB can define what that means. So in some places, a sidewalk might make sense, in other places, a multi-purpose path, some, variety of ways that can be resolved in built form. But the idea is to provide safe off-road multimodal connectivity.
Well, as I said, I lived there for 25 years, and there are very few people that walk along there. I've ridden my bike there ever since the shoulder was widened, and I like it. That's where I want to be, is on a widened shoulder. A serious bicyclist belongs on the road, not on a separate lane.
And really not so much to split hairs, but yes, I agree with that. We've also had some fatalities because there isn't enough space, or cars don't pay attention to bikes, or bikes ride three abreast sometimes, and that's bad. I have seen people walking on that, and it makes me cringe every time. There's a couple that walks their dogs sometimes in the morning, and that
Yep.
I always worry about something happening. So, and that is the whole impetus behind the purpose of let's get paths in there and connectivity, so that there are safer means that are not motorized options.
And I don't argue with that, but I think that, is it fair for me to pay for 600 feet of that right now? Isn't that a decision that the town needs to decide on, and then the town needs to pay for it? So if the town wants me to chip in so many % with my project, I think that's fine. It's not appropriate for me to have to put out $75,000 for 600 feet of sidewalk that's going nowhere. And it's not, you haven't had an engineer that looked at it either. Which side of the road does it belong on? And is it practical to do there, and et cetera? There's no plan.
Sure. Well, and it's unfortunate that you're in the middle of this. I would say that this certainly highlights that there are some gray areas that need to be ironed out. That ironing process will take iterations of meetings and warnings and getting into changing bylaws. So I was just looking at what can be done to help with this particular situation, and it sounds like the only thing that can really be done is to have somebody there to suggest what the intent was. And then, at least in this case, it would just be up to the DRB to make that decision, interpreting the laws as written. Is that an accurate? I mean, I get that this is not an ideal situation. I absolutely get it.
I mean, it's very expensive to do anything in this town. I'm going to have spent more than $20,000 to split my lot into two pieces here. Just in, all the engineering drawings I have to have, all these meetings, all this sort of stuff. Today I got a bill for $2,100 from my lawyer for this sidewalk thing, because he's trying to study all the regs and see if we can do something about it. One problem is that you have the word shall in there, and it's hard to get around that.
And remembering back to that, and I think at the time it was around a larger development thing, so that was clearly what was in mind. But what this highlights is that there are certainly there's more discussion that needs to happen. There's more fine tuning of the regs that needs to happen. I don't mind saying that I am a fan, and I even have a note here saying that if a property happens to be on a non-sidewalk side, then there should be there could be a contribution of a fee or something that would go into a fund that then goes into building paths and sidewalks and maintenance and that sort of a thing. But that gets into that's all part of a much bigger discussion that actually needs to be codified. It is not there now.
And the select board would be the one to
They would need to do
authorize
that,
that. So that's, but it's, yeah, I mean, how do we make this something equitable, more equitable?
And in general, I would like to see things simplified as well. It's something that gnaws on me when we get into discussions, and it seems like we're overcomplicating something. Because we've heard that feedback before, that it can be difficult to get things done in Shelburne because of multi-steps and fees, and it can get expensive. But that is a theme of trying to simplify as well. But in this case, I think that the DRB would need to interpret as best as they can with what they have and take whatever testimony can be received.
I think one question that I do have, and I think Dean, you can step into, is regarding easements, and whether that's something that the DRB can request from an applicant instead of the sidewalk or the alternative facility, because that is one possible way of reading this as well, of the section.
Is that even something the planning commission, I mean, we
I
can't.
believe that can be done, but it's been done in the past.
But we.
I don't know how the new,
I would say, at a minimum, that would be, critical to at least secure an easement, because, you don't want to be coming back after the fact, years later, when there's a huge traffic problem, and, we can't, it's going to be very difficult to, maybe gain the ability to make an important intervention that needs to be made at that point. I mean, we're trying to, this is why we need a plan, right? And a map that shows where all this stuff is gonna go. So it's, it's unfortunate that we have this kind of mismatch between, the very, prescriptive regulations, but not a lot of information about where this is supposed to go, and then we don't have impact fees on top of it. So,
And if you're gonna make these requirements, it needs to, you can't just have your bike committee arbitrarily draw a map of what they would like. It needs to be engineered, so that it can be real. If you really want it, you need to.
The Bicycle and
move the right
Paths
way.
Committee has to come to the Planning Commission, and then we have to approve it, and then it has to go to the Select Board, and that doesn't happen on it simply.
I'm sure it takes forever, but where's the engineering in it? Where's the reality of this?
Well, Webster Road's a good example of the reality, right? It took a while, but they then had to get all the approvals and regulations and engineer it, design it.
Or what?
Webster Road path, yeah.
Webster Road is awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm pretty sure that you didn't require individual homeowners to contribute a lot of money to that. That was a town project, wasn't it?
Right.
That's great. I think that's ideal.
But it's individual homeowners that are looking at splitting lots is different from individual homeowners living along a road and having the town build a sidewalk on that road, right? I mean, not to, again, recognizing that this is an unfortunate situation and we're ironing this out and you happen to be in the middle of it.
I won't be the only one.
Sure, right. Well, which is good that this is being raised and that we can actually get this on a future agenda to really get the ball
it
rolling.
should probably go on the top of our list.
It should. Yeah, this would be a good priority to have. Because I know, at least from my notes, I've got a few things that could clarify, but me saying those doesn't have any bearing whatsoever. It's not until we actually get that into a debated reg that goes to the select board that gets approved that becomes the updated regulation.
Well, in the case of that Spear Street section, Mac Farm is along there also. I mean, you're not gonna put a sidewalk there. It's gonna cost an unbelievable amount of money, because the town is gonna have to take that land by eminent domain. And, you know, there's a big drop-off right into people's yards. What are you gonna do?
There are lots of examples like that where we could just say, you know what, it's going to be too hard to make any changes, so we're just not going to do anything.
Which is probably what's gonna happen.
Sometimes that does happen, but other times things come out of it. And the idea behind the paths and discussions that we've had and what the paths committee is trying to do, and recognizing that you can't please all the people all the time, you got to start somewhere. I think the housing committee had the same issue when we asked if they look at hamlets, and it didn't matter where you look in town and say, hey, we could potentially have a hamlet there. As soon as any resident in that area gets wind of it, they're going to say, no, hamlets are stupid. We don't want to do that. But that shouldn't preclude us from exploring the concepts and talking through it and seeing how this works. And I think the idea behind having a sidewalk or an alternative facility was so that we could secure the space to be able to have that option in the future. That future could be in 6 months or 20 years, but if you don't secure the option now, you never have that option, and you're going to end up with a patchwork solution or no solution.
The town already has a 66-foot driveway. On that whole road.
Yeah. So for this though, recognizing that if one of us could be there on, it's Wednesday?
Yeah, so it's Wednesday at 7 PM.
Well, I went the last time, I'm wondering if somebody else can.
And there's a site visit at 6.
Yeah, at Alan Kirkpatrick's property at 6747 Spear.
What's the number?
6747. You've been working on this too long now.
I know.
Okay. Yeah, I could feasibly make the site visit in perhaps the first hour of the DRB. I don't know if anybody else
I may
has
try
more.
to, I'll see what my schedule is.
Yeah.
If I can't be there, I'll be there.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Then, yeah, I'll stick that in there and can be in touch as
All right.
well.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you for putting this together, though.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, it was a great memo, Ravi.
Yeah. And apologies for you being in the middle of this, but
Well, I understand, and I appreciate your time.
yeah. Well, thank you for yours as well. I know it got
Yeah.
late. All right. So, Grant.
Running grant. In your packets was material related to planning grant application that's development. I had included the first part of the grant application form as I drafted
Do you
it,
need a
and
mic?
then I attached the. Oh, thank you, Wendy. Sorry about that. Mic, sure. So the issues before you really are, if you had taken the time to look at the draft grant application text that's in the first part and you wanted to pass along any possible edits, I would receive those. I don't know that you need to take time in this meeting to do that. I also wanted you to see the draft, or to see the scope of work that was submitted and approved when the city of South Burlington prepared a similar grant application. I have, in my updated version of the grant application, revised that, but what I'm referring to is this attachment A, which spells out the steps, who's responsible, what the details of the task are to some degree, and how many hours. So long story short, the scope of work is coming together because it's been written already, basically. When these grant applications are submitted to the state, there has to be some indication that the budget is realistic. That's usually done by working with a consultant who is providing some verification that the budget is reasonable. I have had a conversation, a pretty long conversation, with a consultant who has been doing the work for the city of South Burlington, and she's going to be getting a letter to me regarding the budget in time for the select board meeting, where we make the request for them to authorize the grant application, and that's happening on the 25th. So the deadline is October 1st. Select Board will, knock on wood, authorize the grant application on September 25th, and the budget will be flowing from the number of hours. It'll be in the neighborhood of what we see here, and if there were any suggestions for edits, please let me know.
Yeah, I just had some very minor ones that we can talk about later. Yeah, it looked good though. Was this? Oh, and this was modeled off of the South Burlington one, right? Or
Yeah.
This is the South Burlington.
The one, well, there
it's-
is one that's South Burlington, and then there is one that's from Shelburne, and I think that I included in the plaque, it's just the one from South Burlington.
Got it.
But I
Okay.
do have a Shelburne version. I can even send you a very simple side-by-side comparison so that you can see what was
Yeah,
changed.
yeah, that's fine.
So should we change hamlets to, what do we call them? Tonight, we changed,
Oh, a cultural center was different from. I think Jonathan's concept of a cultural center is different from a hamlet. It's more like a bigger venue for people to get together.
I thought Kay had to come up with a term.
Settlement types?
Oh.
Settlement types?
Well, to Dick's point, I will say that in the version that I've drafted with the possible changes to the scope where South Burlington has its own set of possible PUD types, I am proposing to include a rural PUD type that would be the place for what Jonathan is talking about. So if we hired someone like Sharon, she would examine that possibility. So it's not a hamlet PUD type per se, but it's one, part of their analysis would be spent doing something like exploring what Jonathan wants.
I thought we were going to be focusing on design, physical design of these things,
And
not regulatory process and all
There
that kind of
isn't-
stuff.
This is not, so unlike the South Burlington project, which has as its product draft language, this is not, this is the typology.
Okay.
So if you look at the South Burlington report, this is doing the typology part. It is looking at the design aspect of it. It's not preparing bylaw language. It's the
Okay.
typology first.
Oh, this is the South Burlington one, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I will get the side by side so that you can see it
Okay.
before the night is done.
So if you want to take feedback offline with any.
Yeah, please
stuff,
send it to
then-
me. I mean, that would be the most efficient way.
Okay. Any other questions around the grant? All right.
This was great.
Yeah.
So don't forget about the minutes.
Right. Then I was going to say the next thing is the minutes from last time and the time before.
Yeah.
Let's start.
Should have a quorum for both now, right?
We have a quorum for both. Let's see. We have the meeting. We have the minutes from the 9th in our packet.
From the 23rd.
Oh, I'm sorry, the 23rd.
Yeah, and if someone needs a copy of the minutes that were not approved, I can share those.
You have a copy of the 9th, too.
That's, oh, right. Sorry, I pulled this out of my packet. I was
Yeah.
gonna say, why am I looking at these right now?
Which one do you want to do first, the 9th?
Yeah, if we're all in a position to do that, sure.
Was I here all night? I don't think
Uh,
I was.
I was ready last time, I don't have it here, but I was.
You
ninth one?
were,
I was all
yes.
set last time.
Yep.
I have the 9th if somebody wants them.
Oh, I was present, okay.
Yeah. So if you want to skim them really quick, we can.
Well, this was one, the public meeting one.
public.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So take a motion to approve the
Oh, I was there, okay, I remember that.
minutes
Yeah.
of August 9th.
Move the motion to approve.
All right. Moved by Asim.
Second?
Second by Kate. Any discussion? I didn't have any comments.
I didn't either.
Okay. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Minutes from the 9th are approved. Now a motion to approve the minutes from the 23rd.
So move.
Moved by Dick. Seconded by Susanna. Any discussion?
I only had one comment on Article 4, the zoning topics. Steve I don't know if that. I don't know if the note made sense, does it, the first line?
Stevens and Lynn suggested adding text, that line?
Yeah. Does that make sense to everyone?
There was something missing,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure
Or
what is
less.
missing. Well, it's that, he suggested adding text to say slopes of 15% or more, except on lots of 15 acres or more, or what?
Right, or what?
Right, right. It's-
And I think it was gonna be that we were gonna remove the requirement for slopes of
Less than
15%
For less than 15.
on lots that are less than 15 acres
Right.
that are being subdivided. That was the whole concept of removing slope versus from the developable land.
That's what threw
Concept.
me
Yes.
when I read
Right.
this.
Right. So how, I mean, well, with Steve and I here, do we want to wait and ask him next time? And we'll
I'm
just,
pretty sure that's what he intended to say.
I think it is, because I believe that's where that discussion went.
And what would the words be so that Mary Ann can,
Right. Uh, keep-
Slopes of 15% or more would be removed from lots of less than 15 acres, something.
Or would remain included except on lots.
Right.
It could be phrased either way. The point was to remove the slope.
Slope was gonna be eliminated
Contingent.
from the dev restrictions per the third bullet above, but only for the
Only for lots
Lots.
that were
15 acres and less.
Acres.
less, right.
Less than 15 acres.
Oh, okay, so it'd be adding text to remove slope, instead of say, I would say to remove slopes of 15% or more except on lots of 15 acres or more.
Of less than 15 acres or more.
so
No.
can it be something like, is the
Oh,
idea?
except on lots
To
of 15
remove the
acres. Okay.
15% except on lots that are larger than 15 acres.
Right.
Yeah, it was
15 or greater.
to avoid, with the really large developments, have a more fine-grained
Right.
control, yeah.
So is the idea, just that I'm following, that Stevens Lynn suggested adding text to the section to say slopes of 15% or more would be a factor in density except on lots of 15 acres or less?
That would also, yes.
But that's the idea, I'm
That
just
is
trying to
the
work
idea,
it straight in
yeah.
my head, that that's
Right.
what.
The simplest way, which would not be grammatically awesome, would be to change the word say to remove. Alternatively, you could do it the way you said it, which is basically just flipping it.
Mhm.
Or remove the 15% slope requirement, except on lots of 15 acres or more. And I'd be happy if we want to figure out what that looks like and even have a quick chat with Stephen before an official update, if we're all
Yeah, maybe
okay
we
with the
just put it on
spirit
the
of
ice
that.
when we're
Yeah.
done.
Oh, you just
Well, I
all
mean, I
together?
think that Mary Ann's gonna be working on the minutes from this tape, so she, and then what's happening before the meeting adjourns is what's happening now. So, I mean, but maybe I misunderstood you. I mean, she should be able to make the edits based on what she's heard so far, unless you're saying it's uncertain, and if it's uncertain, we should
It's
just
not
wait.
uncertain. I mean,
I remember, that's what he said.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we could just say, instead of say, just say slopes of 15% or more, we can just say remove 15% slope requirement except on lots of 15 acres or more.
Sure.
Would that work?
Mm-hmm.
All right, any other comments on that? All in favor of the approval?
Aye.
Okay. So then, any other business correspondence? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Dick,
Second.
seconded by Andrew. All right, thank you, everyone.